When you see ADAMA, you see unbridled Black excellence. Whether on the African continent, throughout the diaspora, or in your indigenous residence, it represents our unrivaled global presence. Whether prologue, present, or prescient, it's a tribute to the days of the troubadours and chevaliers, to the griots heaven sent, that raised protest and said none rest until we put down local and global unrest. To those who refuse to be reticent, to those who refuse to be silenced, it's a love letter to Black love, it's a warning to white violence. It's years of tears, it's eons of joy. At ADAMA, you will see yourself, your elders, your peers, men and women, ladies and gentlemen, children, girls and boys. It's a place you can explore, digest, and enjoy in a minute or a week, in a year or an hour. And what makes it unique is that it's complete and completely ours. It's a seed that blossomed and bloomed into a beautiful rainflower. It's an acorn buried beneath a radiant rain shower that grew into a tree. That voice you hear in your ear on the breeze says, when you see ADAMA, you see our unbridled elegance, you see our undeniable presence, you see our joy, our pain, you see our struggle, our reign. When you see ADAMA, you see unbridled Black excellence. Man, my car doesn't talk.
Pleasant good day to those seen and unseen. Welcome to the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta and to the kickoff of our spring 2024 season of the ADAMA Arts Salon. I'm Takeyah Young, and I'm proud to serve on the board of this groundbreaking institution. Today, I'm honored to be in conversation with artist, activist, and producer Charmaine Minniefield. Now, before we get started, I would like to mention that this program is a complement to the previous program ADAMA held, where a board member was in conversation with the artists and scholars Kelly Taylor Mitchell and Dr. Arturo Lindsay. Ms. Mitchell and Dr. Lindsay's artistic practices build on the concept of family, both on a personal and universal level. They draw inspiration from African indigenous practices and traditions that have emerged from the Black experiences in the Caribbean and the US South. You can experience their work in our current exhibition, Through Lines, from now until March 30th, 2024. Although we are virtual for today's program, ADAMA's exhibitions and in-person events will be held at our new home at Pittsburgh Yards and Atlanta's historic Pittsburgh community. So let's begin. Keeping with the theme of ancestral memory, I am joined today by artist, activist, and producer Charmaine Minniefield. Welcome, Charmaine. How's your spirit today?
Very good. Thank you. I'm excited to be with you today.
Glad to have you here. Glad to be here in conversation with you. So we know that your work is rooted in ancestral veneration and womanist social theory. So tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us more about your connection to that work and what actually brought that forth and what actually was the impetus for either maybe shifting in that direction or going in that direction as it relates to your work.
I have a long journey in my faith practices. I was raised Pentecostal and have since gone to Nigeria and been initiated in Ifa, and also engage in community through inviting culture and spiritual practices and learning and exchange in that. And that has even guided me as I've, come to create my body of work recently with a focus on the ring shout, and that being a path of ancestral veneration for me. My great-grandmother taught me to shout. And I was born in Indiana, and I'm learning and mapping those traditions through my work. But this current body of work maps the ring shout, but ancestral veneration goes through all of my creative practice and career, even in my muraling, and how we center and recall memories and communities as monuments to the legacy of our ancestors. And so I've, you know, for me, ancestral veneration also is resistance work in spaces of erasure. So some of my murals are in places that are being affected by gentrification. So to uplift an ancestor in that community is also to place, you know, certain, with intention, certain social iconography within that community, and therefore resist, and instead invite and pull in Black narratives to invest and remain in those spaces. And so now with the ring shout tradition, I'm doing all of that work of resisting erasure in community as an act of resistance because it's ancestral veneration. Now along the Gullah Geechee corridor, for instance, but wherever we are in society, you know, in this, especially in these parts, you know, where we have been forced to settle and forced migrated, you know, just finding our way back using the ancestors as the guide, as our guide to Sankofa, returning back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I love all that you shared, and I'm looking forward to diving a little bit deeper into the components that you shared. I'm definitely a believer in ancestral reverence and see the value in the work that we do. I want to dial into maybe a time when maybe if at all, you as an artist and you as an activist might have been maybe separate at some point. Do you ever can you think of a time when you might have been maybe an artist first, and then you realized that your activism needed to come to the forefront, or perhaps you were an activist and then the artistry became you know, something that needs to come to the forefront? Clearly, we know from your work, it's a very holistic and integrated experience, but can you recall when it might have been maybe a separate experience and then began to come together?
I think that, you know, when you come into like awareness of your environment as a young adult, my work was political. I was my student body president. I was the first Black class president at Agnes Scott, you know, college, you know, even in middle school and in high school, we staged a walkout, you know. If we were, I was always political. And then being raised in the church, I was always engaged civically, you know, and in volunteerism in that sense of it. But we always had a sense of civic duty in that environment, and I think that's where that comes from. But you know, I come from a line of artists too. My uncle used to build things and was a legend in our hometown in Fort Wayne, Indiana, for how he built things. And then my mother, you know, really was an apprentice in his presence, and then that I think transferred to me. So I think, you know, as a griot storyteller of our family, I can trace our stories and how we told them creatively, artistically, you know, as far as I can recall. And now, with understanding and researching the ring shout, I can trace them back, you know, through my great grandmother's memories, and all of that is artistic. You know, we were call and response. We were musicians. You know, down. I'm right here in the Gullah Geechee corridor. We did a tour, and a tour guide bust out in full harmony singing, you know, and he said, "We know how to sing down here. You know, don't you know how to sing?" And of course, I was like, "Yes, I know how to sing too."
We do.
You know, we do. So we were, you know, we were always artists. I think the political part to me was always there, just because of by virtue of the fact that we are in this environment, and our existence, our expression is resistance in you know, to a degree. We freedom, you know, have a chance to be ourselves. But very young, I identified as an artist in my family, and everyone just fed it. Everyone gave me all this art supplies. Every holiday, every birthday, I got art supplies, and so I was nurtured really young as an artist. But by the time I became a young adult, you know, and folks in my family were also, political or active in their unions or their,
Okay.
whatever the events or history was that we were inside of. We were always sort of present in it. Yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
doing this. I'm doing the same. I'm just doing the same.
Doing the same. Exactly. And I think, so speaking of which, when did you think your expression of that same thing shifted, if at all? I mean, because I'm sure, we all evolve, right? We evolve just as human beings being on this earth. We evolve spiritually from the different practices and rituals and initiations that we have. So do you find that from your own experience that there was a very pivotal point
Moment.
when that showed up differently for you?
When George Floyd was murdered,
Hmm. Tell us.
um, I was in the Gambia studying the origins of the ring shout by going to traditional spaces and seeking my grandmother's memories is what I was doing. And when George Floyd was murdered and COVID was all around, I went within, within my own prayer practices and asked my grandmother, my great grandmother, as an ancestor, what would we have done in the worst of times? And I mean, like a chorus, like a mighty flood, she said, we would pray. We were praying people.
Well, yes.
And for me, that put a mirror right in my face. And I began to recall all the memories of those prayer traditions from a new lens that was, I think, traveled or returned, certainly, because I was there witnessing it. And the traditions weren't necessarily religious. They were rites of passages, they were celebrations, they were all expressions of ourselves in movement and song and dance and rhythm and food, all of it survived. So that's what I began to study is how did we survive? What was that consistent element that was always present, and that was the Blackness. Our prayers were different than anyone else's prayers. When Christianity met us, we changed the whole culture. There's no other form of Christianity than the Black church. Even in Islam, it's the same way. It's like West African Islam is very different than everywhere else in the world type thing, and it's that Blackness. And for me, inside of my faith practices, movement practices, prayers, I thought, wow, my grandmother is coming forward to tell me this. She's reminding me to come back into myself, like that possession would have been, the shout, which is a calling, which is a possession of memories of her and all of those who came before her, like they were doing during the ring shout. So I think that with that awakening, like, okay, this is what we do, and then a real just intentional focus on that tradition as a model, as a guide in society, even remembrance as resistance, that's when everything, I think, just started aligning. Like, okay, yes, and all of us have ancestors.
Right. And, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think when people talk about ancestors or mention it, some people who don't connect with that language think that we're talking about something else. And we're talking about the same thing. We're all talking about, we didn't get here, depending on your belief system about antiquity stories, we weren't all just placed here, right? We all came from someone, came from somewhere, and there's a history and a culture behind it. And I think this idea behind ancestors, when you use the term, people sometimes disconnect themselves from it. However, as you mentioned, we all have it. I think it's very interesting when I read about you and your great grandmother's name. I think her name was, by Orly Fuqua. And I think it's very interesting to be able to name those who came before you, just from a reverence perspective. And I love the fact that you're able to retrace your stories through the ring shout. For those who aren't familiar with it, I think in season in Queen Sugar, there was
Yes,
a ring shot. I'm not
yes.
sure. I was trying to figure out whether you were involved in that or not as a consultant,
No,
but I was
no,
wondering about that.
I
But for
want to
those who,
be.
I know, right? So there was a ring shout. For those who don't know, there was a ring shout scene in Queen Sugar. I think it was season 7. So if you go back and look at it, you'll see it. But for those who are watching now and listening, describe in as much as you can what a ring shout is and what that looks like
Okay.
in the work as you present it, especially as it relates to the project that you're working on right now.
Yeah. So the ring shout was a full-bodied rhythmic prayer where we would sing and call in response and stand in circle, and then the whole room of us would move counterclockwise.
Mm-hmm.
That prayer in community,
Mm-hmm.
full-bodied rhythmic prayer in community, would go on all night long. And the most famous ring shout, one of them, is the Watch Night Service, where we shouted all night before emancipation.
Mm-hmm.
The eve of emancipation. And actually, where I was headed to, I'm very near actually, is where the Emancipation Proclamation was read that day.
Wow.
The next that liberation next day, and many of the communities still keep those traditions around here, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the Gullah Geechee corridor. I'm sitting right now on Hilton Head Island. I'm less than a few miles from where freedom first began on these parts for our people.
Mm-hmm.
The Union Army arrived and defeated the Confederate, and they fled these parts. And what became the first societies of freedom for us over here is where I am. You know, I'm recalling the memories in my body again. I am recalling them in community, even in the way that I'm creating the Praise House Project by inviting artists to join me. I'm inviting gathering like praise houses before, homecomings like praise houses before, where we would gather in these small wooden structures and secret safe spaces sometimes, and they were our small praise houses, our churches, and perform the ring shout.
Right.
And so I've been placing praise houses, inviting the ring shout back into our body and community, because what we were doing is we were remembering freedom.
Right.
We were channeling the memories of our ancestors before, our culture, our identity in plain sight. We were remembering freedom.
Yeah.
So I'm remembering freedom in community.
I love that. So I'm curious because of course we know remembrance is resistance. Also, I believe ritual is resistance as well. It can be resistance for me, at least in my world.
Yes.
And so I'm curious for you in terms of bringing that work forward to others to experience and in some cases remember. Do you have any specific rituals or routines that set the stage for your creation of this work?
Oh, good question. Yes. I have community. I have prayer circles. I'm using all these old terminologies that I was raised with, but they wouldn't necessarily be known or identified that way. And it's a way to unify across generations. Women's societies, missionaries, and of course, my elders. I'm down here, so I'm definitely spending time with my elders, and we're doing that in the oral history component. But also, we're surrounding ourselves with healers. We're inviting healers into the space because there is a lot of the returning part is a healing practice, the circle, the return, and our acknowledgement of the earth in that, the medicines, those traditions, those things are all very much a part of the ritual. And I use ritual in this case interchangeably with creative practice.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But our family, we do have an ancestral shrine. But that's our personal space. In community, we're uplifting historic archives.
Yeah.
We have certain elements that we want to have present. All four elements: the earth, wind, water, air. We in that we are acknowledging the earth and the medicine practices. We are going back to the land, especially the land that our elders are working to continue to protect and preserve, especially as all this climate change is happening.
Right.
So where there is, sort of an individual personal ritual, there's also this very applicable macro version of the same that can be held in society. And I want to start to normalize and center our indigenous Black identity as narrative, and solution to replace capitalist extractive, post-colonial, all of that.
Yeah.
These ideas and principles are to me the solve, and that's why our ancestors, my great grandmother reminded me, we would pray. Go
Right.
back, Sankofa, go back to your traditions, and sure enough, to me, it makes sense how it can all be applied to a larger
Yeah, and
sense.
a lot of those tools, and I would say technologies, definitely that we have innately, that they brought us this far. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes the idea when we evolve as individuals, we sometimes, even myself included, have said, we believe that we're going to a better place. So we kind of like, let's leave some of those things behind.
Oh
But really, at the
yeah,
end of the day, even with our desire to leave some things behind, there's a genetic and spiritual download that happens,
yes.
and it just brings it forward. And then we almost, to a certain extent, people then begin to become aware of the remembrance and then go back to using, like you said, the same language and remembering those type of things. You know,
Yes,
I'm
it
curious.
affirms your identity. It affirms who you
Yes,
are today. Yes, and
absolutely.
gives you the way forward. It gives you the map forward. We've always been here. We're always going to survive. We're always life, Black life. You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
you mentioned the Praise House Project, which is basically, not basically, exclusively and really dynamically
mhm,
a public art installation, right? And it's a
mhm,
series that celebrates the African American history and the areas in which it rests. I was wondering, I know you have an exhibit. The next one is going to be in Beacon Hill in downtown Decatur, correct?
mhm. Yes, Beacon
Yes.
Hill, Beacon
So,
Hill.
talk to us about that journey, and then also
Mm.
attached to that, I'm curious if in the process of launching that particular installation, did you have any difficult decisions that you had to make, and then how did you navigate that as an artist?
Man. Okay, so this work is real. I know y'all know. I was crying and all that on social media, child. Because we are channeling ancestral memories. So I'm having these overwhelming emotions of gratitude that they've done all of this.
Hmm.
And the weight of the work itself, like that task of saving a praise house as a community, of moving it, of learning stuff I hadn't learned, of overcoming the fear of not knowing, and then seeing that, hold on, I do know. All
Hmm.
of this is me. All of this is my my right, my place,
Hmm.
as well. Our stories are valuable enough. I am enough to ask, to demand, to stand, to hold space, to expect, to manifest and receive. All of that. That's why we surround ourselves with healers all the time, Sean. Some meditation. It really. And I would say, in this environment with this community, that is really something that is deeply rooted in this work. Is just being present in your desires, in your dreams, and being willing and brave. Like Ella Baker said, we give the reins to the young because they're brave enough to run into the storm.
Hmm.
And so we are doing our part in this generation, if you
Right.
will. But we had to form our own 501c3. We had to convince, just the whole of society, it seems, to invest with us after we received the National Endowment for the Arts. our town grant. We had to be creative and on our feet when folks said that we couldn't build a modular. But then we were faced with an opportunity to save the current structure, though not a modular. And then suddenly in community channel that memory of saving a praise house and relocating it to Freedmen's Land. Like all of it is just, it's a complete turn of events that's obviously divinely led.
Absolutely.
So, you know, and so the challenges are just constant. Another part of it is that, you know, I'm an individual artist, and as a Black woman, I am used to being a one-woman show, doing it. We can just build the world, you know, build the world. No, I need a team.
Right.
I need to pay them.
Right.
I don't need to ask no favors. There's no slavery. We ain't slavery, so you know, and so on. So as the visioning is happening, just really being present in your head, in your ori, in this moment, to see it, allow for it, and be a vessel and manifest, and stay present in it. One of my prayer sisters, Iyanifa, she says, you know, you're just gonna have to sit in it. You know, the ashe of this moment.
Yeah.
You're going to sit in it, you know. And for me, that means holding space, you know, in community and being able to see from this view, you know, and then multiply. Toni Morrison, the purpose of freedom is to free another. You know, so now we gotta give it out. We gotta be a vessel. We gotta get it to the people. We gotta activate a whole new generation. We gotta save the land. We gotta stand in allyship. We gotta stand against oppression. We gotta change.
Absolutely.
Like really.
Absolutely. You know, so it's interesting you talk about that, because actually one of my next questions was going to actually be about, well, two things. Iwapele, of course, which is like good character. So of course, spiritually, it's about, you know, for me at least, is I always want to live a life where my name stays above the ground, right? From an ancestral perspective, that whatever I do and creating an impact. And so you're talking about sharing it with the people, and really at one point you even mentioned the next generation. I realized, I think the other day you mentioned that you have a youth program attached to this Praise House project. So to me, I'm like, that's it. Like, because I think it's one thing to, of course, remember, but then you almost also have to put others in a place to remember as well, right? And so to understand. And so talk about that process. Talk about the youth program that you have. I think it's the Praise House project.
Sankofa, Sankofa youth program.
Yeah. So talk about just in general, sharing information so people understand and draw that connection from a remembrance perspective, but then also talk about the project and the program and the youth program and what's that looking like and what the intention is behind that.
Well, you know, we are preserving Black narratives. So we are doing oral histories, we're doing community-based programming, we're encouraging new and creative content to come out that is Black narratives, contemporary. And in that, we are igniting our young people. We also want to invite them to Sankofa with us, find their ancestral lineages, their genealogy, be the griot in their families, and to know their environment in history. They walk up and down Auburn Avenue and don't know the SCLC, don't know the Atlanta Daily World, you know, don't know the 1906 race massacre. And that's not just the kids. That's like, you know, that's all Georgia State, the international scholars that come off into our city. And how does the city sort of hold that history in a way that can be understood, preserved, learned from, built upon, and really translating that to young people. So what we did was we partnered with the Pittsburgh based organization and church. What's my folks' name? Beloved Community Church. Beloved Community Church. And we did a mural with them in Pittsburgh of an ancestor of the pastor of that church, who gives out food every Tuesdays and Thursdays in that whole community. Like they feed that whole community, love their work. So they reached out to us when they received a grant from the city of Atlanta for a youth leadership training, and we were ready. The Praise House Project was ready because this is what we do. I've done arts programming for young people all my career.
Mhm.
So I was excited to hang out with 6 homeschool high schoolers and their parents. And we went all up and down the historic sites. We went inside of the iconic sanctuaries, Big Bethel
Okay.
and Wheat Street Baptist Church, and they saw the Hale Woodruff murals and all the stained glass windows and all of the just Reconstruction era iconic architecture, you know.
Mhm.
And we told them the story of the 1906 race massacre, and then we ended at my studio where they could see the water tower and then create art. And then the whole series included our going to on a tour to Southwood Cemetery where we sat with Winnie Hemphill, the elder there, who's
Mhm.
the descendant of one of the founders of Southeast Cemetery. And see, I really just have to say cemeteries. Like cemeteries are gold mines of history. We don't
They
have
are.
to just learn. We don't have to learn our history in a book, and somebody don't have to tell us what we can learn and teach either. So
Mhm.
if we return back to the traditions like at Southview, where you go and clean the your ancestors' headstone and tell all the family oral histories on in August. I think the date. I'm going to let y'all know what date it is at
Okay.
Southview. At Southview. So we went down there and learned of those traditions and those ancestors who rest there that, you know, populate the dates on the timeline between the Civil War and civil rights, right?
Mhm.
All of those folks, you know, the normal folks that was making amazing history in our city. And then we ended at the home of Luther J. Price. And if that was the postman who was rumored to have armed the citizens in defense
Oh,
against the mob.
okay. Hmm.
Yes, his historic structure post office sits on the main road, and just behind it is his family home. And a
Hmm.
young family is there now, and they are loving and beautiful, and the house has been renovated and is being used in a loving way. And this is how they are showing them the community. They allowed me to bring the young people there. And
Mhm.
we fed them and their families in that home and learned of his story.
Wow, that's really dynamic. I think that's really dynamic. I'm sure the scholars are learning, and of course, probably going back to their families and their friends as well, and sharing that information and that history. And I think that's a large part of it too. Is that when you when not only when you speak it, there's power in resonance, right? So just the idea of speaking, which I think is why a lot of our traditions have, well, we know that's why a lot of our traditions have sustained, not only for the fact that they've been passed from one to another, but there's resonance and power
Yes.
in that voice and adding voice to it. I mean,
Hmm.
especially from a prayer perspective. I know even as a young person, I told my spiritual mother, and we were talking about prayer, and for a long time, I struggled to pray out loud because I felt that my
Oh,
experiences around prayer had been, in my experience, a little bit, for lack of better terms, oppressive, in my younger years. I just
understand.
always did it in silence because I felt like it was something that was just for me. But
I
then she guided me
understand.
around this idea of speaking and speaking prayers out loud. And so I think part of this idea of like remembrance as resistance and speaking those prayers and speaking those stories are really, amplifying the voices beyond just the ears that they're landing on, or putting it out there into like the ether and putting it out there into the
Yes,
world.
yes, yes. It
And I think it's really dynamic
in
work.
the Yoruba tradition, there's a term called oriki,
Mm-hmm.
and an oriki is a
Yes.
praise song.
Yes.
It is a praise song. So you know, still the song call and response. You know, the oriki of something. Your name is a praise song to your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yep.
know, so
Absolutely.
saying something, speaking it, and they're poems. You know, it's poetry too.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, it's just really standing inside of your own cultural and indigenous identity, naming it and singing that chorus in every generation so they can always know. You know,
Mm-hmm.
those songs are and where they come from, all of our information, all that highway of power, Ashe,
Mm-hmm.
that comes into the presence. And that's really what we're on. We're on channeling all of that Ashe into society, and not being scared, not looking away, not saying it's too hard. I really have no energy. Like, if you really listen to the way I talk or the way I present my work, I don't talk about the oppression,
Hmm. Right.
and it's not to say it's not there,
Right.
because
We
you
know
know
it's right.
I'm over here, and we're on the front lines of erasure. So
Hmm.
you see the societal inequity, you
Hmm.
see the entitlement, you face it in meetings and encounters,
Hmm.
and you have to address it.
Right.
We have to stay right there with it.
Hmm.
And the only way is to be free, to be shown up free, like
Right.
liberated in that moment. And so
Right.
that is, again, that memory, channeling those memories, those
Hmm.
ancestral memories into the present of who
Absolutely.
who we are, who we are. And certainly teaching that and exemplifying that and embodying that in society, and for our young people, our young
Hmm.
scholars. I'm 52, so in the 80s we had mentors. We went to art centers, we had dance programs, all of that. And I feel like, we have to continue to surge in our institutions for
Hmm.
young next generation artists, and for each other and family, you know, in
Absolutely.
this in the same ways as those who come before us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of which, in terms of like, especially as it relates to your own artistic journey and growth, who are some artists, living or deceased, that have influenced your style and maybe even your practices and how you do your work and
Mm.
how you approach things? I'm sure there are a lot, but I'm
Well,
curious.
well, well, we're in Atlanta, so I've had just this dope, like, steady flow of mentors and influencers that all over my career. Baba Arturo, you're on the list, yes. Tina Dunkley. I just love her capturings and renderings of Black narratives, past, present,
Mhm.
and her mark on the future. I love her work. I one of my mentors is Akua McDaniels. We worked together during the National Black Arts Festival years. Ed Spriggs. Oh, I can go on about my Atlanta people. But when all of that was happening, I was also deeply influenced with important exhibitions that came to the city, like Carrie Mae Weems.
Okay. Yes.
Carrie Mae Weems, yes, dining room table. And then the buffaloes jumping off the side of I got to remember all of the proper names of those exhibitions. Just beautiful photographic exhibitions.
Hmm.
And then Betty and Allison Sarr. There was an exhibition at the High Museum. Lynn Marshall Linnemeyer, I think, was connected in as a mentee under Bella. That was something happening. All of that power was in that exhibition, and I remember there being red clay on the floor, and that it was an installation. It was a fully immersive experience. It was found objects. All of those things told me that I could, that I
Hmm.
could. And then I love the G's Benz quilters.
Hmm. Yes.
I'm painting freedom quilts in their honor for my murals. I'm just riding on that freedom quilts. Yep, we're gonna keep this
Yeah.
language alive, full language alive,
Mhm.
and so on. And then I'm just a Sheila Bright and Sheila Turner, the photographers, all of the photographers, because they're
Mhm.
like the visual griots. You know, they
Right.
are they're keeping the stories, but the grand ancestor among them for me is Dr. Doris Derby.
Okay.
The way
Hmm.
she held space and community as an elder, I only want to make her proud. She's now an ancestor. And I just love her example. And then Mildred Thomas. Did you know Mildred Thomas? She's just like fractal, just abstract
Okay.
on something work, but also sculptural, environmental, public art installations. So I'm the benefactor of all of that goodness that's all been seen through Atlanta. So I'm
Oh,
grateful.
absolutely. And I mean, I definitely know you have, of course, deep roots, really deep roots in Atlanta, especially as it relates to the arts community. I think I remember seeing a video where you were talking about enabling art in Atlanta and making sure that that was really present. I'm curious about any of the artists that you might have engaged with in when you were in the Gambia. You're still going back? Are you still bicontinental in terms of your work there? Or you kind
Yes,
of, you
yes,
are,
yes.
okay.
I have land in the Gambia. I'm working to develop into an artist compound, my own home, but that I could host artists to come to. And we hope to take a group over this year. We received an international grant for travel and chose to bring artists here this year. And we're reapplying again and in conversations with that sponsor to take artists there next year.
Nice.
And we want to continue that exchange, excuse me. And in the Gambia, oh my God. So fine art museums, not so much. Of
Right.
course, I made a beautiful hotel into one for my whole community. All of us was up in there. Yes, we were, and the media came, and it was quite lovely.
Lovely,
But
lovely, lovely.
yeah, but we worked with the artisans, the indigo keepers, the daughter and compound of Musa Keba Dreme, who's a
Mm,
renowned indigo worker and keeper out of the Gambia. We worked with carpenters, the ironmen, the
mm.
ironsmith, just on something. I really want to get into it, but we got to get some real funding to ship stuff like that. I don't know. I'm working. I'm building bridges.
Yeah.
But the textile workers, I really want to go back because I did this body of work called Indigo Prayers, but
Yes.
I painted in indigo, and
Yes.
I would like to go back and work with the original cotton and weavers. And there's a sister who's an amazing designer who works with textiles, who's a descendant of designers. That's how folks work over there. Like
Hmm.
what, so I would like to collaborate with her on a line and see something happen. So we're going to continue doing this. We hope to also support Gambian artists and artists out of West Africa. So we've been putting our roots down in certain communities there to make those connections as well. And we want them to come to higher education. We want them to get their degrees, and they're really capable in film.
Mm, okay.
Yeah, over there, they just
In the
happen to
Gambia
have
specifically?
cameras.
In the
Yeah,
Gambia specifically.
it's a young population,
Hmm.
and the live music scene, the hip hop scene, off the chain, amazing.
Sure.
Live music in each village has a venue, and all the DJs and the live musicians freestyle flowing 6 dialects and languages seamlessly over indigenous rhythm.
Mm.
Huge, giant, sold out concert venues. Okay, so those folk, we want. I would love to connect them to
Like,
the
yeah.
music scene and the hip hop and so we just bought Sister Tony Blackman, who's based out of Dakar and
Hmm.
Brooklyn, and she went to Howard University, and so we have a whole collaboration, she and I, that we want to continue to do this sort of cultural exchange between the continent and
Well,
the
that's
states.
great. That's good. That's actually really connected to one of the questions I was going to ask you about, which is that, of course, we know you're working on the Praise House project and things like that. I was also wondering about any other projects you might be working on. You just hinted at one, which I think is really interesting.
Mm.
But and then what excites you most about the work that you are getting ready to do? In addition, I mean, everything, there's a lot exciting about what you're doing right now. But what excites you about the work that you're getting ready
Where
to
am I
do?
going? Where
Yeah,
am
and
I
where are you going,
going?
and where do you see it
Yeah.
evolving? Yeah, where do you see it
Well,
evolving? Yeah.
a couple of things. Institutionally, I'm now a emerging arts organization. So I'm looking to collaborate with a group of projects that are regional.
Okay.
And I'm inviting national funding to come into the region to support that portfolio.
Hmm.
And they are related to preserving Black narratives. That's the mission. It's always going to be. But there's a series of projects I'd like to see happen.
Hmm.
And I did that locally this year as the community-based programming in 2023, leading up to the Emory installation. And we worked with Kimberly Benz and and Santiago Paramore and Salah Nansa and all those good folks. So we want to do a regional version of that.
Okay.
And then for my own creative practices, oh my goodness, I've got a couple of things in the works. I am tracing my grandmother's migrations. So she was born in Central City, Kentucky. I'm going there to excavate that land and those stories. And Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee is where I'm headed to. Got relationships brewing there. And then we were first enslaved in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina, 30 miles south of Durham, North Carolina. And so I've got some North Carolina connections all happening. And that's my creative practice work inside of this regional footprint. And then there's a particular body of concept that I'm creating that I would like to activate within that network that would first activate in Atlanta. And it's a collaboration with Kimberly Benz, of course, and Santiago Paramore, my projection media artist collaborator, and Santiago Sound Installation. We would like to project onto the skyline of Atlanta off of Freedom Parkway.
Okay.
Because we've met the inventors of the projector, and we learned that they could project up to 2 miles.
Wow.
And they can transform a building.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been in conversation with the Atlanta Downtown Arts District Corridors and Midtown Arts Alliance and Fulton County, Mississippi. Everybody's in meetings in hopes to realize this idea.
Wow.
And we would wrap the city of Atlanta in the ring shout.
That would be powerful, as you already know. Like, that is amazing. That's, I mean, a city raps, but that would be a different level.
And so I'm sharing. This work is anchored in technology. Though it's ancestral memories and Sankofa, and technology is a huge anchor in it, and that also is resistance because our stories are not being activated at that level. We want to push that work forward in that way. And then we want to put teams and communities all over the Gullah Geechee corridor to project on praise houses at the same time.
Love it.
So
I love
that's
it.
what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
I mean, that's a lot, you know.
That's a 2 to 3 year project. Well, the praise house was that.
Okay.
It was a 2 to 3 year project. So we are we're getting in the rhythm. We know
absolutely
this is what we do. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, this is a really I personally enjoyed this conversation, but I'm sure our listening audience enjoys it as well, those who are listening live, as well as those who are going to be listening on the recording. Before we go, I definitely want to make sure that we have your information out there. We already have been sharing it, but we want to make sure people can connect with you. So share the best ways for people to not only follow your work, but also to support your work. Can you share that with us?
Thank you. My portfolio website is charmaineminniefield.com. And my nonprofit and public art series workshop, the Praise House Project, is thepraisehouseproject.org. And we are actually celebrating the installation of the Praise House at Beacon Hill. And that will open March 30th, this coming weekend, March 30th. We are excited that we just channeled the ancestral memories of saving a praise house and putting it on a flatbed and moving it across town to Freedman's Land. And that's
I
where
saw that on Instagram.
That's what we literally channeled in that ancestral memory in community. And it's right now resting on freed land in downtown Decatur at Beacon Hill. And we're inviting families to return back to that community and tell their stories. And we're about to record our oral histories with the elders, and we're going to be there until Juneteenth when we're moving it to Southview. So
love it.
We will move again on Juneteenth, which is the middle of the week this year, to Southview with the goal of opening a few days later in concert with the Juneteenth celebration downtown. So
I love it.
Us.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Charmaine. I really appreciate the conversation. The ADAMA community appreciates the conversation. And those who are coming in the future will appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much. I'd like to close out the program by letting people know that ADAMA is here. We are based in Atlanta, producing great work and sharing information about what's happening not only in Atlanta, but also throughout the African diaspora. And your support keeps experiences like this free and open to the public. So definitely go to adamatl.org and you can make a tax-deductible donation there. Also remind you that you can visit the Through Lines exhibition at Pittsburgh Yards before it closes, and that's here in Atlanta, and that exhibit closes on March 30th. I also want to mention that we have our next in-person art salon at Pittsburgh Yard in Atlanta on Sunday, April 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And there we'll have Lauren Tate Baeza in conversation with Marcela Nkolo. And the program will center around the theme of diaspora narratives. So you can RSVP for that event, which happens on April 7th at ADAMA's website, which is adamatl.org. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. We look forward to seeing you again. And thank you very much once again, Charmaine. Have a blessed afternoon and day.
Yes, yes. Greetings.